get the ball rolling. I'm just going to turn my video on for a minute and say hello to everyone. I'm going to be moderating today's session. So welcome to everyone to the third webinar session for Research Skills for Library Liaison. As I said earlier, my name's Jenny Campagnolo and I'm from Griffith University. I also have Jackie Wolstenholme here today. Hi Jackie from JCU, and you'll hear more from Jackie in a little while when she introduces our presenters for today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I know most of you probably have attended either the first or the second one of these sessions, but just a little reminder on how the session will actually work. So today's session is being recorded, and I forgot to turn my video off, so I'll just turn that off now. So the recording will include all of the audio, the slides, as well as the chat conversations, and the recordings will be uploaded to the QLOC YouTube channel, and those links will be sent out later on. Please turn off your video throughout the session. We ask that you do this as it does tend to slow down how things work during the session, so it's just easier if everyone has their video turned off. You are able to access your microphones and able to talk, so if you do want to add something during the session, Kylie has asked that we leave questions until the end of the session today. But if you do have a question during the session, feel free to add it into chat, and then I'll collate those questions and we'll work through those at the end of the session once Kylie's finished going through the content. Just raise your hand if you want to catch our attention. I'll be monitoring the chat as well. And we ask that we have no private chats during the session. Keep it friendly, professional and productive. And chances are, if you have a question, then the answer will be relevant to most of us attending the session today. Just a quick run through of the Collaborate tools. So if you look to the left of your screen, I'm sure most of you have discovered this already. So just above the participant list, we've got a couple of symbols that we may ask you to use throughout the session, and they allow you to let us know how you're actually traveling as the session goes through. So can I just get an idea from everyone if you can hear me loud and clear? It's a bit late to check this because hopefully you've heard everything that I've said up to this point. Excellent. I'm seeing lots of ticks coming up for yeses. Thanks, Tony. We've got a yes in the chat window, so either a yes in the chat or a tick. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. I'll just clear those responses. And I'm sure most of you have discovered the chat window also. So again, just a reminder, feel free to post your questions in the chat window and then we'll address those questions at the end of the session. So what I'll do now is hand over to Jackie to introduce our presenter for today. Thanks very much, Jackie. Jackie, we're not getting any audio from your end.
How's that? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
right.
And there's a quick flash of what I look like, and so I'll turn the video off to save bandwidth. And I'd just like to say that HERDC and ERA are key drivers in research at our universities, so it's really important that we have an understanding of both for providing research support. And this webinar was to be presented by both Kylie Poulton and Marianne Barrett. Unfortunately, Marianne is not able to be here today, so Kylie will be flying solo. And Kylie began her library career as a researcher in investment banking before joining information services at Griffith University. During her career at Griffith, she held roles in liaison librarianship, project management, and change management. She has also led Griffith's higher education research data collection team and worked as a project officer in the university's research office. So she's got lots of hands-on experience with HERDC. She's currently Griffith University's business librarian. And Marianne, who can't be here today unfortunately, started working in libraries at Flinders University, South Australia in 1993, processing readings and audio recordings for the Reserve Collection. Marianne joined Griffith's Library in 1995 as a film clerk, ordering 16mm film and video for teaching purposes, and worked in lending at most of the Brisbane campuses. She was instrumental in creating electronic access to past exams and course readings in the research collection, and in digitisation and distribution, creating electronic readings for courses in learning at Griffith. In 2005, she was instrumental in creating the university's open access repository, Griffiths Research Online, and since 2009 she has been processing HERDC and ERA publications for submission to the government. So will we now have to hand back to you, Jenny, or over to Kylie?
So let's get going on this introduction to HERDC and ERA. And as Jackie mentioned, unfortunately Marianne couldn't be here today, and Marianne's role is directly involved in the HERDC collection, so I was hoping that she could answer any tricky or technical questions. But if there is something that I can't answer, Marianne might be able to get back to you at a later date. So what do those acronyms stand for? So HERDC, or HERDC as some people do call it, stands for, oh sorry, I'm just having trouble navigating these slides, stands for the Higher Education Research Data Collection. The ERA, or ERA as it is commonly known, stands for Excellence in Research Australia. So both measure the research outputs of Australia's higher education providers. However, there is a fundamental difference between them. The Higher Education Research Data Collection measures quantity. So the collection is done annually, and universities, or higher education providers as they are called in the HERDC process, submit the amount of research income they receive for the reference year and the number of research publications produced during the reference year. So for example, the 2015 HERDC collected data for the 2014 calendar year. It's currently collected by the Department of Education and Training. And now, research income refers to Australian competitive grants, CRC research income, and public sector and in-industry research income. Now, the ERA, on the other hand, measures quality. So it evaluates the quality of research conducted in Australian university. It takes place every 3 years, but it assesses a 6-year period of publications. So the 2015 ERA, which recently wrapped up, will assess publication outputs from 2008 to 2013. And the ERA is administered by the Australian Research Council. So there are funding implications from the two exercises. The data collected through HERDC is used along with data on research student completions, research student load and staff numbers to determine each university's annual research block grants in a number of schemes that are listed on this slide. So the term block grant means that the universities are given a single amount for each scheme, and they are responsible for administering the schemes. In 2015, 1.77 billion was given to universities as block grants to support research and research training. And results from ERA are used to provide universities with block grants under the Sustainable Research Excellence Scheme. And this scheme is to help universities meet costs indirectly associated with research activities, such as financial management, performance and reporting frameworks.
So how does it work? Okay, in the HERDC process, universities report the amount of research income they receive and the number of research outputs published in the reference year. I'm going to be concentrating on the research publications part of the process, as the calculation of the research income is generally administered through the research management offices of universities. And also the research publications part of the process is the most relevant for our work as librarians. So during the HERDC, each university report the number of books, book chapters, journal articles, and conference papers published. So those publication types have codes that you may have heard of: A1, B1, C1, and E1. Now, although they originated from the HERDC process, they're commonly used as shorthand to describe the attributes of those research outputs, and I'll talk more about them in a moment. So the data on the publication outputs are collected every year, and that same data is used for the ERA reporting. However, for ERA, creative and performing arts outputs are added and submitted for evaluation. So having an understanding of the research publication categories is very useful as I work as librarians. If your client base includes high degree research students or early career researchers and you are advising them on publishing, it's important to encourage them to make sure they meet the HERDC publication requirements. This is because their outputs can be included in their institution's collection, but more importantly, it ensures that they are meeting a quality benchmark. If you work with undergraduates, having an understanding of the research publication categories can help you assist students in finding quality scholarly resources. But before we look at the publication categories in a little more depth, there are two more essential requirements for HERDC and ERA to look at. The definition of research is one of the most important aspects of both HERDC and ERA. It is central to the whole process that all submitted research outputs meet the definition. The wording in the HERDC and ERA guidelines is slightly different but essentially the same, and this is the statement from HERDC. Research is defined as the creation of new knowledge and/or the use of existing knowledge in a new and creative way so as to generate new concepts, methodologies, and understandings. This could include synthesis and analysis of previous research to the extent that it leads to new and creative outcomes. So the HERDC guidelines state that all research outputs must meet the definition of research. And ERA goes a little bit further and says institutions must ensure that all research outputs submitted to ERA meet this definition of research. Outputs that do not meet this definition may be excluded from submission during the ERA submission process, or where they are not excluded from submissions, their inclusion may adversely affect the quality rating assigned by research evaluation committees during the evaluation process. So as librarians, having an understanding of how research is defined, it helps us to support students to find and identify quality scholarly research outputs. The other central element of HERDC is peer review, and this is how they define peer review. An acceptable peer review process is one that involves impartial and independent assessment or review of the research publication in its entirety before publication, conducted by independent qualified experts. Independent in this context means independent of the author. Peer review is required for journal articles and conference publications, and it is also required for books and book chapters that are not published by a commercial publisher. So let's have a look at those categories in a little bit more depth. So all publication categories need to meet that definition of research, but there are also unique requirements that different categories need to meet. So for books, the rules surrounding the publisher are a distinguishing point. The requirement of having been published by a commercial publisher is a proxy for peer review, and books must also be a major work of scholarship. And the HERDC guidelines give examples of what may meet the criteria and what does not. And you might want to note that textbooks don't count. They're not considered to be research. For book chapters, the requirements regarding commercial publishers are the same as books, and once again, chapters in textbooks don't count, along with entries in reference books, brief introductions, editorials, translations, case studies, and encyclopedia entries. None of those things will count for HERDC. Journal articles must be published in a scholarly journal and must be peer-reviewed. However, If the article is peer-reviewed, it still must meet the definition of research. Outputs that don't meet the criteria include letters to editors, case studies, editorials, book reviews, and brief commentaries. And conference papers must be published in full, be peer-reviewed, and be presented at conferences of national or international significance. But once again, they still need to meet that definition of research. Now, writing conference papers is a great way for high-degree research candidates and early career researchers to start their publishing track record. So if you are advising them on publishing, you should make them aware of the criteria for HERDC conference papers. It's also important to note that if a conference paper is also published as a journal article, only one of those outputs can be counted. And the HERDC collection is very thorough. Everything needs to be verified to ensure each output meets criteria. Here at Griffith, every output is assessed to make sure it meets the definition of research before all other criteria is checked. And universities are required to keep records for 7 years because they may be audited, and auditing does certainly happen. So let's move on to Excellence in Research Australia, or ERA. So why was ERA introduced? Well, HERDC is about quantity. In HERDC, a journal article published in Nature is worth the same as a conference paper. So put simply, universities aim to win more competitive grants, have more publications and HDR candidates, because this leads to more block funding. And Margaret Shiel, who was the CEO of the Australian Research Council during the implementation of ERA, said that this can lead to a mindset of doing better by doing more. And that research excellence assessments ask whether we're driving research excellence rather than just research quantity. And also, Australia was following a global trend. So ERA commenced in 2009, and it replaced the research quality framework exercise that was never implemented. That was scrapped after Kevin Rudd's Labor government won power in 2007. The RQF, the Research Quality Framework, or the RQF, had been modelled on the United Kingdom's research assessment exercise, but it was criticised for trying to apply a one-size-fits-all approach to measuring the quality of research. Now, ERA, on the other hand, applies a matrix of measures to assess the quality of research. ERA commenced with a trial in 2009 and had rounds in 2010 and 2012, and the recently completed one in 2015. So what are the objectives of ERA? These are how they are stated in the 2015 submission guidelines. So it is all about assuring that taxpayer funding is spent on quality research. It's a stock take of research strengths. It aims to identify excellence in emerging research areas and allow for comparison of discipline areas. The fifth objective is interesting in that there is an increasing emphasis on university rankings. There is a tendency to rank universities as a whole without acknowledging that each university will have a particular discipline strength. ERA evaluates the research undertaken in institutions by discipline. So discipline strengths can be recognised. However, some of you may remember when the results of the 2012 round were reported in the press, and maybe not surprisingly, the focus was on ranking university as a whole. So how are the universities evaluated by discipline? Well, the primary unit of evaluation is the field of research, as identified in the Australian and New Zealand Standard Research Classification. These are commonly called FOR codes. So ERA assessment takes place at the 2-digit and 4-digit level. The 2-digit code reflects the division, and each division is based on a broad discipline. And the 4-digit code reflects groups of related fields of research underneath those divisions. So each research is assigned at least one field of research code and a maximum of 3. And universities decide on the assignment of the field of research codes for each output. And the example I've got on the screen, you can see that the mathematical sciences is the 2-digit level, and then you can see all the 4-digit levels underneath that. So each unit of evaluation is assessed and rated by research evaluation committees. They're also known as RECs. And the RECs are comprised of experienced, internationally recognized experts. The research evaluation committees make their assessments using a number of various indicators. These indicators are not applied to all units of evaluation. So indicators of research quality are demonstrated by publishing behavior, citation analysis, and ERA peer review. Indicators of research activity are demonstrated by the number of research outputs and the amount of grant income received. Indicators of research application include commercialization, income, and patents, etc. And indicators of recognition include esteem measures such as being an editor of a prestigious work of reference, memberships of learned academies, and Category 1 research fellowships. So ERA has a discipline matrix which outlines what indicators are assessed for each field of research. So as you can see, not all fields of research are subject to citation analysis. So this is because it is recognized that all disciplines are not fairly represented in citation databases, and that citation analysis may not be the best way to assess the quality of research outputs. And that's why ERA includes a peer review component, where universities can nominate 30% of outputs within a field of research to be peer reviewed. So in this example, the disciplines within the studies in human society are not subject to citation analysis. Instead, research outputs are assessed through peer review. However, disciplines in psychology and cognitive sciences are assessed through citation analysis and not peer review. So having an understanding of what disciplines respond well to citation analysis is really useful when we are assisting academics and researchers measure their research impact. And the ERA discipline matrix gives you a good overview of what indicators may be best to measure research impact for each discipline. Now the journal rankings are gone. You may have heard of the contentious journal rankings that were created for the first ERA round. This was a list of journals ranked A star, A, B, and C, and it was an attempt to rank the quality of journals. It was widely criticized by researchers and academics and was scrapped for the next ERA round. This list is still talked about a lot, and apparently some universities still use it as a performance measurement tool and encourage researchers to publish in those top-ranked journals. However, the Australian Research Council has strongly discouraged this. The journal list still lives on in a different format, and there was also a conference list and a publishers list, but they're no longer ranked. To be eligible for ERA, journal articles need to be published in the journals on that list. And the list is just made up of journals that have been active during the ERA reference period. They must be peer-reviewed, and they publish original research and have an ISSN. So research evaluation committees will, however, have access to publishing profiles for each unit of evaluation. And here's an example of a journal publishing profile. So the research evaluation committees can see the number and percentage of articles published in a particular journal. Publishing profiles are also produced for books and book chapters based on how many books and chapters are published with a particular publisher, and they're also produced for conference publications. So publishing profiles are to identify the depth and breadth of publishing behavior within a unit of evaluation. Committees will also have access to staff profiles for each unit of evaluation, and these report the academic classification level of each researcher and give a head count for each level. So Scopus is the citation provider for ERA 2015, but as I previously mentioned, not all disciplines are subject to citation analysis. So 3 types of bibliographic analysis are used. Centile analysis. So centile thresholds are derived by determining the number of raw citation counts required to be in the top 1, 50, 25, and 50% of all the world. They also use distribution against relative citation impact classes and relative citation impact against Australian and world benchmarks. Now, if you're interested in finding out more about the citation analysis, there is a detailed explanation in the ERA 2012 Evaluation Handbook, and the link to that is on the screen. So the results for ERA 2015 will be available later this year. But here are some of the national overview results from the 2012 exercise. You can view the league tables by institution and field of research code at that URL listed on the slide, the ERA Outcomes 2012, or read the national report. I just picked a snapshot of results to show you today. So in terms of research outputs, journal articles were by far the most common output, accounting for almost 70%, followed by conference papers. And in terms of research income, most income is received from Australian competitive grants. These are the disciplines with the highest number of units of evaluation submitted for ERA. So this gives an indication of the largest areas of research in Australia. And they're medical and health sciences, biological sciences, engineering, commerce management, tourism, and studies in human society. And not surprisingly, staff profiles correlate to this result as well. And also not surprisingly, medical and health sciences were the biggest winners in terms of the amount of grant income. Another interesting result was the emerging disciplines. This is based on the discipline growth rate measured in outputs. Complementary and alternative medicine had the highest discipline growth rate across the reference years. Results also showed emerging multidisciplinary research with psychology and cognitive sciences and medical and health sciences having the highest multidisciplinary percentage of outputs. In other words, outputs in psychology and cognitive sciences discipline were also assigned field of research codes in the medical and health sciences discipline, and vice versa. Some other interesting findings you can find in the report include outputs and staff by employment level, cross-institutional collaboration, and co-authorship. But probably what most people are interested in is seeing how the universities compare. And you can look at the results by field of research and at the institution level at the ERA Outcome 2012 website, which the URL is on the slide. It's a good place to get a snapshot of the data. But just to give you an example of what it looks like, this is the results for field of research 0206, quantum physics. Each eligible institution is given a ranking. And these are some of the results for my institution, Griffith University. And where a unit of evaluation is not assessed, it just means that the institution did not meet the low volume threshold for assessment to occur. And the low volume threshold is 50 research outputs. So in other words, at least 50 research outputs within a field of research code need to be submitted for those fields of research. And for those fields of research that are subject to citation analysis, at least 50 journal articles need to be submitted. So what do those ratings mean? Well, here is the ERA rating scale. Units of evaluation are rated on their performance against world standards, and world standard refers to a quality standard. So a rating of 5 means that they're performing well above world standard. A rating of 4 means above world standard. A rating of 3 is at world standard. A rating of 2 is below world standard, and a rating of 1 is well below world standard. I'd just like to finish off today by mentioning some of the implications, both positive and negative, of ERA. So the Australian Research Council claimed that it is improving the quality of research and driving performance of Australian universities in global research rankings. It also claims it is making universities accountable for the money that governments provide them. The cost of ERA as of December 2013 was $43.5 million. However, the ARC say that it is cost effective in terms of the amount of funding that universities receive to fund their research. They also say that it concentrates research effort and it leads to improved IT systems that can facilitate streamlined workflows for research administration. However, it has been criticized for becoming a performance management system, giving greater power to research managers to dictate research priorities in academic inquiry. It's also led to increased administration for research staff and increased costs to universities. And there has also been much discussion about the equity of assessment between the disciplines. So that's where I'm going to finish off today. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see if there's any questions.
Thanks very much, Kylie. I know I certainly found that really informative. I learnt a lot from that presentation. What I might do now is hand it over to you guys and see if there's any questions that you'd like to post to Kylie, or any questions that we can forward on to Marianne after today's session. If you'd like to use your microphone, just raise your hand and then I can hand over to you, or if you feel more comfortable posting your questions in chat, that's great too. So we have a couple of people perhaps typing in chat. A couple of great questions here. Thanks, everyone. From the USC library, will anything replace the journal rankings? What do you think, Kylie?
As far as I'm aware, there will be no replacement of the journal rankings because they were very contentious and they are still being discussed. As you're probably aware, there are some discipline-based journal rankings that are still quite commonly used, but I haven't heard of the ARC planning to reintroduce the ranking system.
Great, thanks, Kylie. Maureen, I will post that link in the chat window again for you in a moment. And now we have a question from Graham. Could you talk a little bit about the HERDC rollout process? We only undertook that at La Trobe this year, and it was a big undertaking. In capital letters, big. B-I-G. Sounds a little traumatic, Graham.
Well, thanks for your question, Graham. This is why I was hoping that Marianne would be here, because she has a greater understanding of it than me. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to answer this correctly. I'm presuming that you're referring to how the process is undertaken. So I guess what I will do is maybe just briefly discuss how it's undertaken here at Griffith. And the library plays a central part in the HERDC collection. Our Office for Research do manage it, but we have an agreement with them to do the collection. We have a research management system, and it's a database where we ask our researchers and academics to enter the details of all their research outputs. And then we have a team of people that, and Marianne is one of those people who actually do the verification of all those outputs, and also produce the final reports for the HERDC. And the Office of Research then takes the lead in the ERA process, and they will, they're the ones that they look at the outputs. They assign the fields of research codes before submitting it to the ARC. I'm not sure if that's answered your question entirely, but you're welcome to contact me after this is over if there's anything else we can explain.
Thanks, Kylie. Another question from the Bond Uni team. How are fields of research compared against the world, i.e. how do they evaluate the world?
Oh, okay, that is a tough question. Probably I would suggest, if you wanted to have a look at that more in depth, is to have a look at the document that was provided for the evaluation committee, and the link to that is on one of my slides. And that's actually the guidelines that the evaluation that was given to the evaluation committees, which described them or outlined the way that they had to assess each unit of evaluation. Yeah, that's probably the best way I can answer it at this point. Yep.
Great. Okay, another question from USC. Thanks, Beck. She said, thanks, Kylie.
Jackie, should I interrupt? It's Jackie here. Just following up on, actually, no, there's two Grahams there. So sorry, I'm jumping ahead in the chat. So we can come back to QUT Graham's question in a minute.
Thanks, Jackie. Good spotting. So back to Beck's question. What sections of the HERDC/ERA process is done by the library versus the Office for Research or the Research Office?
Okay, well, I guess we probably do more of the administration of it. Well, because at Griffith we are also part of the Greater Information Services. We also work closely with the IT. They belong to our section. So we sort of have ownership of those IT systems that are used to administrate the HERDC and ERA. In other words, to help us collect the data. And the library is the one who does the verification process. So all the publications that come in have to be looked at, every single one of them. They're checked to see whether they meet that definition of research, and then they're checked to ensure that they meet the criteria for the categories which they fall under, and they're those A1, B1, C1 and E1 categories. So that's what we do, and we also look after, make sure that the deans of research for all our schools are involved, and because they need to, at the end of the day, sign off on the process before it goes up to our Vice Chancellor. The team that our research publications team is in constant communication with our research office to ensure that the process is on track. And with HERDC, there are very tight deadlines that need to be met every year, so they ensure that that happens too. But because we're all using the same research management system, once that process is done and the verification process has been completed, then the staff in the Office of Research who will be looking at the data to send to ERA will be looking at the same information, and then they can do what they need to do by assigning FRO codes, etc.
Great, thanks again, Kylie. Now back to Graham from QUT's question. Surely some case study research must count towards HERDC, for example, information systems.
I guess it depends if it meets the definition of research. And having been a part of HERDC verification in the past, it's not always easy to determine whether something does meet that definition of research. Now, if it does meet the definition of research and all those other criteria, then it will be included. But I guess because of the nature of those type of outputs, they've said that they don't fit into that. But certainly if they do meet the definition of research plus all those other criteria, then it's very likely that they will be included. If there's any doubt about something like that, research deans always have the final say.
And Carly, I was just going to chime in there as well, but the way that the term case study is used in different disciplines does vary. And so what's important is that the definition of research, as you said, is what helps you to make the decision about whether the publication should count or not. And so I know that within education, they often have case studies that are describing full research projects, but they often use the word case study in the title of the publication or maybe in the abstract. And so that's definitely something to look out for, that a case study, according to the HERDC specifications, will not count for HERDC, but there's often a publication using the term case study that will count. And I think a useful way to work this out is that if the publication is only describing a single case study without putting it in the context of what's known about that topic. So using a medical example, a patient or a couple of patients present at a hospital with a particular symptom, and a doctor writes that up and maybe even describes how he dealt with the situation. That won't count for HERDC if he's only describing that scenario. So hopefully that clarifies things, Graham. So so you've got another comment there. Info systems at QUT do a lot of case study methods. For example, and they got an ERA rank of 4 in 2012. So that's entirely possible. It just depends on whether the publications were actually full research studies or just simply describing a single scenario.
Great, thanks Jackie and Kylie. One more question from Tanya. What research management system software do you use?
That is a tough question. I'm not sure. I don't know, maybe one of my Griffiths colleagues who is listening can answer that one. But I might have to, I do know that the back end is PeopleSoft. That's what we use. But I don't know any more details of that. We have done a lot of, built a lot of interfaces on top of the PeopleSoft software for our research management system.
Thanks, Kylie. And it's Jackie again. I can say that I know that how we do things, so Kylie's explanation of process at Griffith was excellent, but both software and process I know varies enormously at our different universities, and not only does it vary, but it's evolving over time, so hopefully becoming more streamlined. But one definitely good outcome is that both ERA and HERDC has helped us to build relationships between library and research officers, and I think there's much greater collaboration and awareness of what each party can bring to the process now. So at QUT we have a system that called our Research Information Management System, and that's based on an Access database, so it was developed here at JCU. I know some unis are implementing Symplectic, so that's another option that some of you might be aware of.
Thanks again, Jackie and Kylie. Okay, so looks like we've reached the end of our questions. Does anyone have any other questions before we bring the session to a close? Great questions, by the way. Thanks, everyone.
I have a question. So anyone that is involved in processing HERDC records, what's the most common question that you get asked from researchers? Is there anyone that could offer their experience there? Well, Kylie, could you?
Well, like I said, it has been a few years since I've done this. I guess sometimes there's been a bit of uncertainty around why the publications were not accepted for the HERDC categories, why they're rejected. This mightn't be so common now. There might be a little bit more understanding in the researcher community, but there also used to be a number of issues when they published conference papers and journal articles, and they couldn't understand. They published a conference paper as a journal article, and they wanted it to count both of those. But unless the journal article was substantially different, they were not able to be counted twice. And I mean that goes, the same if you wanted to publish. Generally, they should be substantially different. So that always that was another common question that we were asked. And I suppose there was also some issues about submitting publications, because it is an administrative burden on academics, very time consuming, and in the past they couldn't submit electronically. They could submit the data about their publications electronically, but they would need to provide hard copies. They need to photocopy journal articles, etc. I mean, that doesn't happen now, but that was always quite difficult to do. And it was quite common that there was a lot of outputs that weren't being reported, but we've closed that loophole here at Griffith, and we try to capture everything. But I'm speaking from a bit of an historical perspective. Sorry, but I hope that helps.
Thanks, Kylie. You're getting lots of thank yous in the chat window, by the way. I'll just pass those on. What I'm going to do now, everyone, again, if there's more questions, please post them in the chat window. I'm just going to post a link to the feedback form via SurveyMonkey. So if you can just take a couple of minutes, really quick evaluation of today's session would be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much for attending. Jackie, is there anything you'd like to add before we sign off today?
No, just to say thanks to Kylie, and it was really excellent, Kylie. And it's great and refreshing to hear about these topics that can be a little bit dry from another perspective, and it was, very, very interesting and engaging. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you back online same time next week for another exciting session. Thanks again for taking the time to log on today and spending your possible lunch hour with us. See you online soon.